So the first of the epidermal appendages that we're going to talk about is the Arrector pili muscle. This is a small band of smooth muscle, and it's attached towards the base of a hair follicle, and when it contracts, it elevates the hair follicle. You can see it pointed out in the image below. Another appendage is the nerves and sensory receptors. Now, there are many sensory receptors present, but you really only need to think about two of them, and that's going to be the Pacinian corpuscle and the Meissner's corpuscle. Those are located here and here. Pacinian corpuscles are located very deep in the dermis, sometimes down in the hypodermis even, and they're very distinctive. They're characterized by these multiple layers of connective tissue with the free nerve ending in the middle, and these are specialized to detect deep pressure and vibrations. The other nerve ending that you need to know is the Meissner's corpuscle. In contrast to the Pacinian, these are very superficially located. As a matter of fact, they're tucked into the dermal papillae right underneath, or between, I would say, the epidermal ridges. These are specialized for fine discriminatory touch, or what we call two-point discrimination. There are several different glands present in skin as appendages. We're going to look at two types of sweat glands and the sebaceous gland. So Eccrine sweat glands you looked at when we looked at epithelial tissue. These are the simple coiled tubular glands, and they're present down in the dermis or hypodermis is where you're going to find the secretory portions of these. They are distributed widely throughout the body, and they help to regulate body temperature. They have both a secretory and a duct segment, the secretory segment being lighter staining and the duct segment being darker staining. And the secretory segments and the more basally located duct segments contain another cell type called myoepithelial cells, which contract and squeeze out the secretions, which in this case is sweat. So Eccrine sweat glands can be regulated by both the autonomic or the sympathetic innervation. In the case of autonomic cholinergic innervation, that's when you're dealing with temperature regulation. This contrasts with adrenergic sympathetic innervation, which is what happens when you have emotional related secretions. In other words, if you're angry or nervous, everyone's had their palms get sweaty, all right, so that's regulated by adrenaline. That's adrenergic. The other type of sweat gland is called an apocrine sweat gland. These are also simple coiled tubular glands. However, the duct does not penetrate through the epidermis directly. It actually impinges onto a hair follicle, secretes into that hair follicle space, and the secretions get out onto the skin via that route. These are present only in specific locations, and those are the axilla, in other words, under the arms, inguinal and perianal regions. These are distinguished from the Eccrine sweat glands by the very large diameter lumens of their secretory portions, and they also contain myoepithelial cells, which help to express out the secretions from the glands. These glands become active at puberty, and their composition and smell of secretions causes the body odor. They're also related to pheromone release, all right, and that has to do with the major histocompatibility complex and mate selection. So you can see the cells that are the secretory cells in the small inset at the top there. So with apocrine sweat glands, male pheromones which are given off in this secretion directly affect surrounding females' menstrual cycles, and the female pheromones influence male hormone levels and influence how men perceive the women. And it's also been established that people can be more attracted to the pheromone or odor from someone who has a very dissimilar major histocompatibility complex to themselves. The third type of gland we're going to look at is the sebaceous gland. Sebaceous glands grow from an outgrowth of the epithelium of the hair shaft. Therefore, they're very closely connected to that hair shaft. Usually there are several secretory acini directly around each hair follicle. They produce an oily lipid secretion called sebum, which is secreted via a mechanism called holocrine secretion. So what that means is that these cells do not secrete by exocytosis. They actually eat the cells themselves, simply are secreted. They die, they burst, and all of their oily contents gets secreted in that fashion. So a clinical correlation here is that acne is due to a retention of sebum in the hair follicle, and then you get lymphocyte infiltration into that area and it swells up. It's kind of like a very small inflammation there. So this diagram kind of summarizes the appendages that we discussed. So you have hair follicles and Arrector pili muscles attached to them. You have apocrine sweat glands in very specific locations, and their ducts will impinge onto a hair follicle for secretion. You have sebaceous glands, which are found in clusters directly applied around hair follicles. You also have eccrine sweat glands, which have secretory portions that are deep in the dermis or even the hypodermis, and then have ducts that go all the way up, penetrate through the epidermal layer, and directly secrete onto the surface of the skin. The last thing we're going to discuss is temperature regulation. The skin is a major thermoregulatory organ, and it does this through the combined functions of the blood vessels that are in the dermis and the eccrine sweat glands. So this is how it works. Increased body temperature causes vasodilation in the dermis. That increases the blood flow, and then heat dissipates. Also, you get increased sweat gland activity, and that cools via evaporative mechanism. So the water evaporates from the body surface and causes you to cool down. The decreased body and skin temperature causes the opposite response. So you get vasoconstriction, and that conserves heat. And then you have a decrease in sweating, so you have the decrease in the evaporative mechanism.